In this review of the week's news, a shooting rampage in Ashburton left 2 dead. The 2 main party leaders clashed in a political debate, and too many people to count walked through the Littleton Tunnel to celebrate its 50th birthday. This is CTV News Week in Review. I'm Grant Mangan. A community was left devastated after a homeless man killed 2 people and injured another in Ashburton this week.
Ashburton in lockdown. Armed police have cordoned off several streets after a shooting this morning.
This is a very tragic event. 2 people have lost their lives.
Something like this couldn't happen in a place like Ashburton.
Police are seeking a homeless man, John Henry Tully, after a shooting that killed 2 people and injured another at the Ashburton Work and Income Office on the corner of Mass and Moore Streets.
So Mr Tully, when he was last seen, we believe was wearing camouflage clothing, has a balaclava and may be in possession of a sawn-off shotgun.
48-year-old John Tully was last seen cycling towards the Ashburton River.
We were undertaking quite a thorough search of the riverbed area with AOS and SDG members. We have helicopters activated. We are looking for that person of interest.
At one point, the area surrounding Lake Hood was blocked off by the Armed Defenders Squad. This man had been locked out of his home for an hour and a half when we met him at the edge of the police cordon.
I've just been told we're not allowed on the farm. There's been a shutdown at Lake Hood.
He was shocked by the day's events.
Well, you always expect it to happen somewhere else, don't you? Obviously, very sad day for Ashburton, to be fair.
This woman was saddened to hear of the deaths. She lives metres from the Work and Income Office where the shooting happened.
Pretty scary, just sort of looking out of the window and seeing the Armed Defenders Squad.
Ashburton Mayor Angus Mackay was horrified to hear of the shooting.
A very, very sad occasion. Ashburton is not this kind of town.
He says Ashburton is a close-knit community and the local council wants to help any way it can.
A number of people in this town will know the people involved, and my heart goes out to those people, and if I or the District Council can be of any support to them in whatever way, we'll do our level best to assist.
Mr Tully featured in a series of articles on Ashburton's homeless problem last month. He'd recently moved back to Ashburton and was camping at the local domain to try and raise attention for his plight. It was reported he'd asked for help from the Mayor and local MP Joe Goodhue. The Ashburton public has been warned to stay indoors, while armed police and dog handlers continue to comb the streets, searching for John Tully. Marcus Gibbs, CTV News.
If this week's leaders' debate was anything to go by, the race to be the country's next government is set to be a tight one.
A debate of 2 leaders. Prime Minister John Key went head-to-head in the Press Leaders' debate against Leader of the Opposition, David Cunliffe. Key's opening statements painted National as a strong and stable government, with Mr Cunliffe stating Labour would strive to create the fairest, most decent society in the world. Both leaders were firing at each other following TVNZ leaders' debate, which lacked the same spark as last night's.
When you have a big audience like this, it's kind of a bit more fun. It's just typically a bit that kind of debate. When you're on a televised debate as we were last week, you have quite a lot of interruptions. You don't have nearly as long a time. You have a moderator that's interjecting, and they need to do that. It's just a different format.
Held at St Margaret's College, Christchurch issues fuelled the second half of the debate, with Key defending the slow pace of the rebuild, telling the crowd Christchurch's central city is booming and almost full. Key's hometown advantage was lost when locals took to the microphone to ask the leaders questions, shedding light on the insurance issues still facing many locals almost 4 years on from the earthquake. Cunliffe promised to speed up post-earthquake recovery, committing to building more than 10,000 homes over 4 years, as well as revealing MP Clayton Cosgrove as Labour's earthquake minister under a Labour-led government. But Cunliffe tripped over the topic of capital gains tax, put under pressure by Key when asked if family homes in a trust would be exempt. Cunliffe was rattled and unable to answer.
Well, I've learned to check my facts, and so I thought it better to check that one before answering.
The leaders fought over minimum wage, child poverty, spending, state housing and tax within the 2-hour debate. The 800-strong crowd divided at the end on who was the clear winner, that decision being left to the polls on September 20th. Emma Cropper, CTV News.
The leaders debated many topics, but the state of housing New Zealand homes came under fire following comments made by Prime Minister John Key.
The state of housing New Zealand homes was a hot topic at last night's debate. Labour leader David Cunliffe vowing to improve the standard of state housing if elected, saying growing mould within homes is unacceptable and Kiwi kids need dry, warm homes to grow up in.
The whole point of a safety net is that you can bounce back, get a ladder up and make better for yourself, your life and your family. Everybody has hard times, everybody's made bad decisions. We want a caring society where people get a second chance and a way up.
Of course the state's got to maintain it, but my government has maintained those state houses. My government's invested a huge amount of money to make sure those 65,000 state houses weren't left in the condition that we inherited them in. We've improved those dramatically.
Well known for growing up in a Christchurch state house himself, Prime Minister John Key says it's the responsibility of the tenants to look after their home.
My mother was fastidious when we had our state house and she did wipe the mould off, and personal responsibility does matter.
But Key defended his comments following the debate, saying he wasn't implying tenants don't look after their homes.
No, I was making the exact point that we lived in a state house and that state house was in pristine condition, but it was in pristine condition because my mother cared about it and she worked really hard to look after it.
The right of politics around the world has a habit of implying moral fault on the behalf of the poor. There are people who end up in difficult circumstances through no fault of their own. There are others who get there because of bad decisions.
Housing is a big election issue in Christchurch. Comments made around housing at last night's debate could sway local voters. Emma Cropper, CTV News.
With Sarah set to wind down next year, the government has announced plans to change the earthquake recovery structures for Christchurch.
Under a national government, the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority will be integrated within the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Announced at a Chamber of Commerce meeting in Christchurch today, Earthquake Recovery Minister Jerry Brownlee reassured the changes do not affect the government's commitment to Canterbury.
I think it means that they should be confident that the recovery is moving at a pace that means that we can start moving back to a situation where the government is able to continue to provide resource but pull back on some of the day-to-day decision making.
Minister Brownlee says since the earthquakes, the face of the recovery has evolved. As it continues, there needs to be a plan for transition and longer-term governance. The transition to take place in February.
My expectation is that, as I said in my speech, Mr Sutton would stay as the head of CERA. He's doing a tremendous job. My expectation, if Jerry wanted to, is he'd stay as the Minister for the government. So in essence, the reporting line wouldn't change, but what would also happen is that Mr Kibblewhite, as the head of DPMC, would have some powers and obviously authority over that agency as it sits within DPMC.
CERA was established in 2011 alongside the CER Act, which allowed CERA its special powers. Originally set to expire in April 2016, Jerry Brownlee says the Act will be re-looked at, potentially removing the legislation of the now unnecessary powers.
One of them is the power to direct, for example. We haven't had to use that a lot because there's been such goodwill and throughout the whole process. And some of the others that are not quite so direct, but some of the more obscure sort of powers that we have in that Act.
Minister Brownlee weighed on what special powers he believes would stick around after 2016.
Well, I think some indemnity cover for people that are involved in recovery is one. I think the acquisition program may not be completed, so some of the provisions around those acquisitions would need to be continuing. I think possibly too the ability to make or put together a recovery plan that becomes a statutory document.
As part of the transition, the government also plans to set up an advisory committee alongside local government agencies to help guide the plan development and review the special powers. In July, the Labour Party announced their plan to wind back the role of CERA. Following today's announcement, Labour leader David Cunliffe has come out claiming the government are adopting Labour's CERA policy because the national government are tired and has run out of steam and fresh ideas. The new phase for CERA will come into effect on February the 1st next year. Joelle Batista, CTV News.
Coming up, Littleton Tunnel turned 50 last weekend. More than 25,000 people turned out to celebrate the 50th birthday of Littleton Tunnel last weekend.
Taking a walk down memory lane, the Littleton Tunnel celebrated its 50th anniversary over the weekend, allowing locals this special opportunity to head inside on foot.
We've lived there for a number of years, but to walk it, we drive it every day, but yeah, fantastic.
Great, really enjoyed it. Do it again in 50 years' time.
More than 25,000 people turned out on Sunday to make the 2-kilometre journey.
It's a bit slow going back into the tunnel, but it's a nice experience.
With the young and old proving how far forms of transportation have come, from these historical penny farthing bikes to the latest schoolyard scooter. But these twin brothers took to foot, retracing their steps from 1964.
I went through here with a pair of gumboots on at 14 years old when they opened it.
Many of those who walked through the tunnel were walking through for the second time.
We have the certificate still at home commemorating the opening. So it's a pleasure to be here today.
But not everyone was quite so lucky. This local resident was walking through with just the memory of her mother, who was by her side at the opening 50 years ago.
I'm wearing her watch to be so she's with me tonight. And it's still going. It's 10:25.
This man helped build the tunnel and still holds his original invitation to the opening. The tunnel officially opened in February 1964. When it was built, it was one of the most ambitious highway projects, taking 4 years to build at the cost of $2.7 million. The celebration was delayed 6 months until the new $1.5 million tunnel control building was completed.
In the event of another earthquake, this tunnel will always be safe and always be able to be used.
In 1965, an average of more than 2,000 cars used the tunnel. Today, more than 11,000 commute through the tunnel each day. Emma Cropper, CTV News.
Hundreds of children across New Zealand are fed by tubes into their stomachs. A pilot program begun in August has been groundbreaking for affected parents.
Bonnie Lintott is an ordinary Canterbury woman fighting for change. Her mission, wanting tube-fed children weaned off and taught to eat for themselves. Her aim, getting the Ministry of Health to assist with funding. A groundbreaking pilot program at Starship's Children's Hospital began late last month, aiming to get hundreds of children fed by tubes, learning to eat and drink.
What we want after the Starship wean has happened is the Ministry of Health to actually fund this weaning program, because at the moment it's costing $10 to $14 million per annum to keep these children tube fed, when almost a third of those children, which is 630 of them, could be eating right now if this rapid weaning help was available to them.
There are more than 600 tube-fed children across the country, with at least 1 in 4 identified as appropriate for tube weaning. The trial program comes at a price of $45,000, the bill fronted up by the New World supermarket chain. Bonnie Herdman says this is exciting news. Alongside other mothers across the country, Bonnie has been fighting for other children since her own daughter was cured.
So when I got back, I've done nothing but, with a group of mums from Wellington, campaigned for other children. With the petitions that we did to Parliament, I've been up to Wellington a lot and met with parents up there that are going through hell at the moment because they're not being supported enough as well.
Bonnie's daughter, Inara Herdman, was tube-fed from birth until just a year ago. New Zealand doctors told Bonnie Inara would never eat like a normal child. Determined to try the weaning program overseas, Bonnie and her partner took Inara to Austria to be weaned off the feeding tubes. The process took 3 weeks and was proved successful. Inara now is almost 4 years old. Very aware of the change she went through learning how to eat, she pointed out her scars from where she used to be fed from.
Wow. That was my pig whiz.
Through there? So what happened in there?
I got my food inside. I was a baby.
Bonnie Lintott says the number of children growing up tube-fed are overwhelming and something needs to be done now.
And for the Ministry of Health to fund it, it's going to help a lot of families financially. I mean, parents are going to be able to go back to work if they're not having to tube feed their child all day, and and emotionally. I mean, it takes a real emotional toll on the family and yourself when you've got a child that's deathly ill all the time because of tube feeding. So there's a lot of things that come with tube feeding that are not so pleasant that are related to the tube feeding.
The Starship program has already celebrated some success with tube-weaning children, only 3 weeks through. Joelle Batista, CTV News.
The restoration of Knox Presbyterian Church is well underway, with the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Minister lending a hand.
Well done.
Drilling the last bolt into the roof, Earthquake Minister Jerry Brownlee was on hand to help in the restoration of Knox Church.
Putting on the roof has always been a traditional sort of significant development along the way, and we're really looking forward to moving into the church and being able to throw the doors open, welcome the community in.
The quake bracing technology, which is being used to strengthen the church, was a first for New Zealand and possibly unique worldwide. Minister Brownlee commended the work done to save and rebuild the church.
And what they've done, I think, is blend beautifully the heritage parts that they could save with some very modern exteriors.
Confessing he didn't realise the beauty which was hidden within the church.
I think this is fantastic. This is a beautiful old building. I have to confess that until the earthquakes took the exterior walls down, I had no idea how impressive the roof structure inside this particular church is.
The restoration began in December 2011, being led by project manager Ron Keating.
And it's actually been a dream job because there's so much passion and enthusiasm from everyone involved.
Designed to be a community building, the church will seat around 400 people, with the ability to cater to concerts and plays.
Acoustically, the building has been designed for such use, so we're quite excited about the prospects of the public being able to enjoy the interior of the church.
The congregation has raised the $5.5 million for the rebuild, with help from the wider community, grants and insurance funds.
The congregation see this as a really important part of the development of the ministry from Knox here. You know, clearly there's an element of rebuilding what has been broken, restoring what we've lost. But more than that, it's actually giving us the impetus to think more deeply about our community here, who's around, what we can do in the city, as, you know, a church in a really important kind of neighbourhood.
This Knox Church, one of many signs the city's rebuild is gaining pace.
All in all, though, you look at a street like the one we're standing in, a lot of work going on, a lot of change coming to the city, and I think it's going to be quite a splendid result in the end.
The landmark is planned to be fully reopened in November. Emma Cropper, CTV News.
Still to come, unions are planning a comeback. It was a special visit to the CTV site for a group travelling from Malaysia. Emma Cropper has the story.
A moment of silence to mark the loss of one of their own. The Malaysian contingent for St John, stopping to remember Malaysia's only casualty in the earthquake at the former CTV site. 34-year-old Jin Hai was inside the CTV building on February 22nd, working as a receptionist for the King's Education Language School on the building's third floor. Described by her uncle as a gentle person, this group of 30 St John cadets laid stones in honour of her memory.
It helps the process of coming to terms with what happened here. It also helps people, I guess, support one another and understand what it means. And I think one of the, you know, to the credit of the city as well, having this memorial, the way that it is, the way that it's laid out and the accessibility of it for people to come here and have those moments is muchly appreciated.
The stop was part of their trip around New Zealand in conjunction with St John.
And experience what we do here, how we do it, how we run our program and how we support our young people throughout New Zealand.
Giving the overseas partners a chance to share in the lessons and resources from here in New Zealand.
We all live in a global world, we're a global community, and you know, what might work in one country may work in another.
The lessons St John learnt on February 22nd will be shared with this group. The memory of 34-year-old Jin Hai, a memory of how vital the role of St John can be. Emma Cropper, CTV News.
Human trafficking is becoming an increasingly large problem within New Zealand and Canterbury. A group of local women is raising more awareness around the topic to help put a stop to it.
A message of hope in Hanmer Springs.
Who I'm basing most of my statistics from.
The Haga Foundation held New Zealand's first Hope Conference on human trafficking.
It has been a conference set up for ordinary New Zealanders to be able to go and learn about human trafficking and find out what they can do to stop it.
Haga is a worldwide organisation offering support to victims of human trafficking, including slavery and prostitution. More than 100 people turned out on the weekend to learn more about the issue in New Zealand.
We had people from Auckland, Palmerston North, Invercargill, West Coast, Marlborough. It was amazing.
A topic many would assume only happened offshore, but this isn't the case. In 2012, a Lower Hutt grandmother was convicted as a mastermind and coordinator of a baby trafficking ring, recruiting surrogates, treating them in Ukraine and selling their babies for more than $180,000.
I think it's a topic that people are starting to become aware of. There's starting to be a little bit more in the media and that sort of thing, but what's sort of happening is people are becoming aware. They're not aware of how bad the situation is or what exactly is going on, let alone what exactly human trafficking or slavery is.
There are more than 27 million slaves in the world. More than 70% of those are being trafficked for forced labour, 22% of those for prostitution. The average price of an adult slave is $90, for a child just $50. But the organisation believes human trafficking is an issue here in Canterbury as well.
There's a lot of talk that there is, and most people strongly suspect there is. At the moment, again, we're still trying to find the data to prove that, but it is suspected that there are a lot of people who are being exploited here for forced labour.
Plans are already underway for next year's conference, with the hopes more awareness will come to light around this topic. Emma Cropper, CTV News.
Local workers showed up in full force to a workers' union annual conference being held in Christchurch. Organisers are hoping to build awareness around the effectiveness of unions and the vital role they play in worker equality.
Campaigning against inequality and poverty within New Zealand. This is one of 60 conferences being held around New Zealand by the First Union, an outlet that campaigns for better working conditions for local and nationwide employees.
And it's part of our role about getting decent work, combating inequality in New Zealand, because we have a growing working poor, and that growing working poor almost is entirely composed of non-union people. So we want to get them into the union, get them decent wages, get that minimum wage up to a living wage, and make sure that this is, in New Zealand, a good place to live.
This year's Stop Work conferences coincide with the general election. 3 political parties, the Greens, Internet Mana and Labour, were invited to take part. Robert Reid, the Union First's General Secretary, says it's because their policies are closely aligned to the union's interests. The National Party, the only ones not to receive an invitation.
National Party have plenty other chances to get their views across, and when you read their policies, they do not have the interests of workers at heart. They're trying to make it harder for workers to be in unions, harder for unions to operate, so we don't see any reason why we should give them a platform.
The union represents workers in the finance, retail, logistics and transport sectors. Mr Reid says in order to vote change, he's hoping more union workers won't forget to vote on September 20th.
In order to make sure that your vote counts, you actually have to use it, and that's the message that we'll be putting forward to our members today.
Currently, only 20% of workers are part of a union, but Mr Reid is hoping that figure will change.
We have 27,000 members throughout the country, and our main role is to try and get decent wages and conditions for those members.
The First Union bargains for wage increases, supports hundreds of workers through disciplinary hearings, and saves the jobs of many who would have otherwise been dismissed. Emma Cropper, CTV News.
That's CTV News Week in Review. I'm Grant Mankin. Have a great weekend.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.